Today's webinar is titled Using Assessment Results to Inform Instruction with Jay Wright of CASAS, and my name is Veronica Parker with CAEP TAP. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the California Adult Education website, so I'll be sure to type the URL of where you can locate the webinar and its materials so that you can come back and use it at a later date, or if you'd like to send the link to other colleagues who were not able to join us this afternoon, they'll be able to watch the webinar as well as have the PowerPoint presentation. If you have any questions throughout today's webinar, please be sure to post them in the chat pod. Throughout the webinar, Jay will address your questions as they arise. So please be sure to post them into the chat pod. If he does not get to you immediately, just hold tight and he'll get to you as soon as he is able to. As I mentioned before, the PowerPoint presentation is available under the Resources pod. Just select the file and select Download, and the file will download to whatever browser your computer downloads files to. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone with any technical issues. Annette, thank you very much for letting us know that your internet connection is not working the greatest today. But again, if you do have to leave us for whatever reason, you'll be able to access the webinar recording at a later date. So now I will turn it over to Jay, who will get us started with today's webinar. Jay?
Thank you, Veronica. Okay, hello, everybody. I think you can see from your cover slide what this is covering. It's called Assessment to Instruction. So my quick explanation before jumping in is you're used to hearing from me, you're used to hearing from CASAS a lot about assessment implementation. You're also used to hearing from CASAS and hearing from me about all of the various issues related to California accountability and using TOPS Enterprise to collect those accountability standards. This, you might say bridges those two issues together, where this is basically allowing you to use your assessment results to inform instruction. So it has to do with your students taking the test. A lot of that effort is, to record outcomes for state and federal accountability, but we would say very strongly there's more to the testing than just state and federal reporting. There's a lot of valuable information embedded in those assessment results that can really help inform instruction. There's lots of little tidbits to bring up. We'll cover a little bit of that here all the way around here. But, the big piece of that has to do with the test results reports section in TE. So we'll be detailing some of those, some of those issues. So I guess I'll just say, can everybody hear me, yes or no? Okay, everybody can. I'm not sure about the WAS sound then, okay? I think everybody else can hear me, so I'm not sure. It sounds like everybody can hear me. Okay, so in any case, that's the basic explanation. Hopefully, sorry, I undermined myself here by asking you to respond, and you did a great job doing so. But I'm going to scroll up and also bring up, I pasted a link up here. So I don't know if you can see it, but I scrolled back up to show right when Veronica opened up the chat, I pasted a link to our website. I don't want to impose on Veronica. We kind of have it set just so. But for your information, I've added a link here to our website that ends with curriculum management and instruction. That's the link where I'm going to be addressing a lot of these issues. So if you want to follow along on your web browser while we're talking about this, I already pasted the link. I guess just to make sure, I just went ahead and pasted it again, so it's at the bottom line item there in your, trail here. So hopefully that helps. So anyway, here's the agenda. We're not going to do a CASAS assessment implementation. That's an entirely separate training. But just as an FYI, I did want to spend 2 or 3 minutes just kind of overviewing, a few key things just so, the content for this presentation at least makes sense. That second bullet, to be clear, is where the bulk of this discussion is going to go here for this training. We're talking about CASAS competencies, CASAS content standards, and task areas. Those are the 3 key ingredients embedded in every single CASAS test item. Those are the key ingredients that enable you, again, to use your assessment results to inform instruction. Then we'll get into a little bit just general key considerations, some things with the testing that might be useful. That using test results to inform instruction sounds like a broken record, and of course to a large extent it is, but by that line item, that's what we're talking about more specifically with TE test results. I think a lot of you are familiar with TE. You know that we have the reports menu. You know we've got several options within that reports menu. If you're like most California users, you use those accountability reports backwards and forwards and backwards again. You may look at that test results menu a little bit less. So that's what we're going to really focus on here. Again, breaking away from state and federal requirements and getting more into what will help you on the instruction side. Again, the bulk of our discussion has to do with those TE reports, but I'll point out there's lots of other resources that have absolutely nothing to do with TE that are also very helpful and very useful. So we will spend the last, 2 or 3 minutes or so pointing out a few of those resources. And again, that link that I sent you a couple of minutes ago, that link to the curriculum management and instruction, that you might say is the long story short answer. There's several resources on that web page. We'll be pointing out a few of them. So usually I don't do this, but we've got a smaller group than usual. Sometimes with these we've got 100 or more, so it's not worth our while. But we've got 34 here, so a little more manageable number. So given that, I'm going to take a walk off the plank here and ask you to confirm via chat that you all know what I'm talking about, that what I've talked about so far sounds more or less what everybody was expecting to get themselves into here this afternoon. Sorry, I got to do it. Confirm thumbs up. Thank you, Lindsay. Won't rattle off all of you, but so far so good. Everybody's patting me on the back. At worst, you're basically humoring me here and saying, great, okay, I'm going to take your word for it and move on. Thank you for all of that positive reinforcement. Okay, so moving along a little bit. These are just the attributes, again, based on eyeballing you. A lot of you are familiar, number one. A lot of you are giving me that positive reinforcement, number two. So I think this slide should be all information you know already, just basic kind of promotional bullet points about CASAS testing. Again, it measures basic skills in life and work contexts. It's usable for ABE, ASE, and ESL. You can do group administration or one-on-one. We've got computer-delivered options via e-test as well as the old-fashioned pencil paper. And, of course, it's approved for NRS or National Reporting System reporting, which means, it's allowable for federal WIOA 2. And then by default, that also means it's usable for our California Adult Ed program reporting. My guess is all of you know all of these wonderful attributes already, so we'll move on here. A little bit, we're talking about assessments. So kind of hard to resist bringing up our new assessments called CASAS Goals. I know a lot of you have heard about this. Again, GOALS stands for Greater Opportunities for Adult Learning Success. We have goals for reading, which was approved about a year ago, and we basically implemented here at the start of the 18-19 year. We have math goals, which we submitted last April and are hoping to hear about here very soon. We have reading for ELL that we submitted in October that we're hoping to hear about very soon. And then we have goals for listening, which we'll be submitting here later in 2019. So in any case, we have all new assessments for reading, math, and listening. You can see all of the details here. Long story short is we have new assessments. To some extent, that's because it's required at the federal level as we move from WIA to WIOA. To some extent, we're also doing this because the new forms are aligned to Common Core or CCRF. Long story short is that means we've got more complex information, more quote-unquote data-driven items, more evidence-based items, and so forth. Hopefully this all makes sense, but just so you know, we have some of our new assessments that have already come down the pike and more to follow, hopefully, we'll be getting approval on the math and the reading for ELL sooner rather than later, so it's good to go for next year. Okay, so moving right along here, getting into the meat of our discussion, we'll start with CASAS competencies. So hopefully this looks familiar. Sorry, we're a small enough group that we're manageable. You did such a great job the first time. So are you all familiar with CASAS competencies, yes or no? Okay, thank you. Looks like you're all saying yep. Okay, a couple no's here. So mostly yeses, but a few no's here. Thank you for, like the back of your hand, of course. Somebody's figured out my cliches there, haven't you? In any case, a couple no's here. So to be clear, we have what are called CASAS competencies. What I'd like to say is we have roughly 370 or 380 some odd CASAS life skills competencies. So we have that large number of competencies that relate to everyday life skills that our students need to perform and excel in that big bad world out there. What I like to say is it's not really just for our students. Our students need all of these skills to survive in that big bad world out there. You know, you might say all of us need all of those skills to survive in that big bad world out there. But of course, we're looking at it in terms of students. So we've been working on CASAS competencies for 30, 40 years or longer. We've got that list of 300 or 400 competencies, and they all relate to an everyday life skill. The slide just shows how we've organized those CASAS competencies over the years. We've broken them down into 9 categories. Generally speaking, when we present CASAS competencies, everybody agrees the sort of competencies on the list are definitely things everybody agrees with. The categories we spell out here in 0 through 8, everybody agrees with that also. I can never quite remember, to be honest with you, why we number these categories 0 through 8 instead of 1 through 9. But in any case, I think these 9 categories of competencies to most people, very, very predictable categories, and again, represent the areas that we would all expect them to address. You can see we've got the web link to where you can find more information about competencies, and I'll point out that link I sent out to you twice already is the link to our website that has all of those test results related resources. One of those areas is the competencies section, which includes our competency list, as well as lots of narrative that pretty much tells you everything you'd ever want to know and more about CASAS competencies. So we'll move along here. This is just giving you a little more details. This is what I would call the drill down approach to the competency coding system. That is, the slide I just showed you gives those 9 broad categories. Again, the categories are very big picture oriented, very general. Again, that's what we call content area. Again, that's things like employment, healthcare, consumer economics, and so on. That is the broad generalized category. You can drill down 1 layer, and that gets us to the 2-digit competency area. That's still kind of generalized, but it gets into more details than content area does. And then you can drill down another layer. That gets us to the more detailed 3-digit competency statement. That's what we would call the specific CASAS competency. So, for example, we have content area 3. You drill down 1 layer, that gets us to competency area 3.4, understand basic health and safety procedures. We drill down another layer, that gets us to 3.4.1, interpret product labels and safety warnings. 3.4.2, identify safety measures to prevent accidents. Again, as you drill down, you get to 1 more digit, which gets you to 1 more detail, 1 more layer of detail. Once you get down to that 3-digit number and the greater level of detail, that's where you find the specific CASAS competency. And then I'll just point out in the orange box, that's what I would say the beauty of it is. The beauty of it is that we've basically embedded every single CASAS test item to at least 1 CASAS competency. In doing that, the beauty there is, at the end of the day, when all your students complete testing, We can run those reports in TE by test item. We can run it by agency, by program, by class, by individual student, and relate each item to all these different competencies that we've aligned it to already, and kind of come up with a pattern of student level, class level, agency level strengths, as well as weaknesses for all those different levels. So I'll just pause here again. I'll check in with you again. Does that all make sense to all of you, yes or no? In particular, those that answered no, when I asked you, do you understand competencies, does it make sense to you better now? So, I can't really see you said no, but hopefully you're chiming in here now. Yes, bravo. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, let's move along here. Sounds like we're all good here. And here's just the same information I just mentioned, but a little bit more mechanical detail here for you, where again, the 1-digit content area, the 2-digit competency area, and then the 2-digit CASAS competency statement. This is giving you the same information, but it's just a snippet straight from that official CASAS competency list, so you can see how it looks in that official documentation. Okay, so next big concept is called task area. So the short answer is we have those reports in TE that we call the competency reports. More on that later. In those same TE competency reports, you can also use those reports to organize those test items by task area. The task area has more to do with the format of the test item than the underlying content of the test item. So the example here might be, hey, when I look at things like competencies and content standards, I don't really get any discernible pattern. It never really does much for me. But when I go by the format of the item, that is the way it is arranged on the screen booklet, then it helps me a lot better. So a common example is what you can see here in red, where, hey, when my students get an item in standard sentences and paragraphs, my students do great, but you put that same content in the form of a map or a chart or a graph, my students really, really struggle. Most of you say, yeah, that sounds really familiar. That's by far the most common format. So if that sort of thinking sounds familiar to you and your students at your school, then you might want to consider using task areas. The degree with which we've organized task areas, I've got to say, much lower level of detail for task area than for competency or content standard, but there is a way where you can run those reports and organize those results, again, at the student level, class level, or overall agencies level to the format of the item. Another way to organize it to try to look at overall, student and class level strengths versus overall student and class level weaknesses. And then the final item or and then for task areas, we have reading task areas as well as listening task areas. These are just how they're listed. We've got 5 areas for reading, 4 areas for listening. If you do it in math, you might say it's the same as for reading, where the options are really the same. There's no real difference. It's just the way the items are organized on the screen. You might say the way we organize it for math and reading is basically the same from that point of view. So the final area for which you can organize this information is by CASAS content standard. So we talked about CASAS competencies. The competencies address basic everyday life skills. Content standards, on the other hand, address academic skills. So the common way you might hear this one brought up by, agencies or whatever is a lot of times people might say, well, hey, in some cases, those everyday life skills, represented by competencies are helpful, but not necessarily always. Sometimes my students need more help with academic skills, not with the life skills represented by CASAS competencies. So our answer would obviously be, well, if you're saying CASAS testing doesn't help you, you would definitely be 125% wrong. But all that said, it does mean you need to use a different series of reports if you're more interested in academic skills, our diagnosis then would be you need to use the content standard reports in that instance rather than the competency reports. So the long story short is you go to that same test results menu in TE, the same section of reports in the TE menu, but you go to the content standard section rather than the competency section. The same ways we've organized the competency reports, that is by student, by class, and by agency, those exact same options are also available by content standard. And so again, the organization of the reports is exactly the same, but the underlying content is different. That is, the competencies address life skills. The content standard reports address academic skills. Okay, so getting into the way content standards are organized is, I would say, content standards uses the same basic drill down approach as competencies. The details obviously get a lot different, but the the way you drill down, where you start at a very broad general area, that is an overriding big picture category. So in this case, we're talking academic skills. So we're talking broad academic skill. Don't think you can get much broader than reading, listening, math, writing, speaking. Number one, I don't think you can get any broader than that. Number two, just like competencies, I think the overall areas we provide here are pretty much no-brainers. Nobody argues with these areas as far as their status as very important academic areas. Nobody quibbles with that. So anyway, we've got these rather obvious academic areas, again, content standard categories, and then you can drill down a layer that gets you into these more specific content standard sections. So sticking with reading, again, the overall category, of course, are the reading content standards. And then within reading, we've got 9 specific areas of reading content standards labeled R1 through R9. You can see the list here in that graphic. Generally speaking, with the content standards, the higher the number, the more complex the standard. So for example, looking at reading again, R1, beginning literacy, R2, vocabulary. Those are super basic level reading content standards in those areas. Things like reading from left to right, identifying letters of the alphabet. As you get to R2 and R3, you get into things like abbreviations and contractions. As you get to the higher level, R7, 8, and 9, you get into more complex content standard areas, things like transitioning from paragraph X to paragraph Y, understanding the content of the material that you just read, et cetera, et cetera. It gets into that level of detail as you get to the higher level standards. So again, I use reading simply because it's the most commonly used one and the one I know the best, but the other categories are managed just like that area of reading is. So I'm going to pause again. Everybody's still hanging in there. It sounds like we're doing all right, but everybody now familiar with the basic descriptions related to competency, task area, and content standard. Okay, sounds like everybody's doing all right. I'll just say any questions. So I am doing this to you. Okay, we're back. We're getting to where we're almost too big to do this, but I've started the pattern, so I'll just keep it up here. But again, this is what I think I've explained already. I move to the next slide. But again, I believe that, we've talked about this, where again we have content standards and competencies going on simultaneously. Again, we have the competency side to address life skills. Again, healthcare, employment, consumer economics. We also have content standards to address the underlying academic skills, reading, listening, math, etc. So we have both going on both are basically existing under the hood, working hand in hand with each other, because of course in some programs, some classes, some students, the academic focus is really what you need to get at the bottom of what the student really needs to get the better support. In other cases, the underlying life skill might be more beneficial. You might say this is, sorry to use one of my common cliches, But you might say this is one of those you say tomato, I say tomato issues, where about half of you would probably say, yeah, looking at it by life skill is really more helpful in our agency. The other half of you would say, yeah, that doesn't really help. Looking at academic content is better. Again, you say tomato, I say tomato. By having both sets of reports existing simultaneously, you don't have to choose. You can do both if you really want. You've got both available at your fingertips if you really want. Okay, so moving along here. Here is a snippet from the web page. So I'm going to send it to you again just because we're on this slide. So I think this is the third time here. Again, easier just to send you this link, but I just said it again. It's the link to our the section of our website called Curriculum Management and Instruction. That's what you should see on your screen right now. But you can see that gives you a variety of resources. You might say it's what I call the teacher section of our website. It has the content standards section that you can see on your screen. It has another section for content for competencies. It's got skill descriptors, EL civics, practice test items. It's got promising practices, all kinds of various little areas related to instructional resources. So on this screenshot, the example you see is the content standards area. I'll just say as a resource, if you want to get into details with content standards, you can go to this page and download the list of all the individual lists. That is, we have individual lists for reading, speaking, writing, math, and so on. You can see down the line, you can go to several different areas of the website and get all of that other information right there in the same section of the website. Okay, so moving along here, getting into overall assessment information. So here's our basic process. This slide, I've got to say, really just a reiteration of CASAS 101, where, again, you've got a new student that comes in. The first step is you want to do placement. Then at the same time, you want to do the diagnosis. Then you want to give the 70 to 100 hours of instruction and then do the monitoring. That is, you do the screening and appraisal. At the same time, you do the pretest. You have the hours of instruction, and then you post-test. So just to get into that a little bit more is just to get the difference between appraisals and pre- and post-testing. So again, with the world of CASAS testing, we have the assessments for placement versus assessments for progress. For the most part, that's probably not the way that you've heard about our assessments, but I'm bringing it up in that way just as an easy way to distinguish our appraisals versus our pre-post tests. So our appraisals and locators are our assessments for placement. Our pre- and post-testing are assessments for progress. I think most of what I've just said here over the last minute is all just semantics here, but just to be clear, so you're clear on all the ways that we describe it. So we have our assessments for placement. We call some of those placement test locators, others we call appraisals. To be clear, I think you could argue that those terms are pretty much interchangeable. There's no real definitive definition or distinction. But I'll just say in CASAS land, the way we normally describe it is this way. When we use the term appraisal in CASAS land, we're talking about that pencil or paper booklet that includes the full appraisal, that is the full 25 or 30 item appraisal binder that you remember from the good old days that some of you might still be using. On the other hand, we might also use the term locator. When we use the term locator, primarily what we're talking about is that assessment for placement embedded in CASAS eTest. Normally, when we talk about locator, we're talking about that shortcut locator. That is the locator that we can get done in 6 or 8 questions quickly and easily, so the computer in a short number of questions can quickly and easily figure out that student's general skill level or level for placement, and thereby quickly and easily assign that student's correct pretest level and have the student do the testing for placement and the testing for progress in one sitting. So here I go again. I'm going to do it again. That was a pretty big mouthful. Is everybody still with me on this explanation on this slide? Yes or no? Any questions at the moment? Hopefully this is working for you. Everybody's saying yes, so I'm going to take this as your story and you're sticking to it. Thank you for being so exceedingly cooperative with this. You have been really helpful. Okay, difference between locator and appraisal. Thank you for being honest and keeping, I don't know if you're being honest or keeping me honest. I guess a little bit of both. But anyway, so the appraisal and locator, for the most part, I would say those are two terms that mean basically the same thing. Both refer to assessments you're using for placement. If you looked in Webster's dictionary, my guess is the definitions would be similar. But applying those definitions in CASAS terms, here's the distinction I would say. When we use the word appraisal in CASAS land, generally speaking, we're talking about that full appraisal. That is that full 25 to 30 item booklet or binder. That is the old-fashioned pencil paper appraisal that a lot of you used in the good old days that some of you may still be using now. We talk about appraisal form 80 or appraisal form 130 or whatever. When we use the term locator, we're generally talking about that locator, that electronic locator embedded in CASAS e-test. More specifically, when we use the word locator, we're usually referring to that shortcut locator in CASAS e-test where the computer can successfully determine that student's placement level in a short 6 or 7 questions. Okay, so Ukiah, you're saying okay. Everybody else, I think that covers all of our questions. So let's go ahead and move along. It sounds like we're okay now. Thank you. Okay, so again, appraisals basically tell us which form is appropriate to administer. So you might say, back to this slide, the appraisal or locator gives us the ballpark figure, but not the exact level of performance. The appraisal or locator gives us the ballpark figure, and then in turn also gives us the appropriate pretest level. We then immediately need to administer that pretest at the same time as the appraisal or locator. Once we administer that pretest, that's what gives us more than just the ballpark figure. That gives us that specific student level of performance. That's what enables that measurement of that student's level of performance and allows us to pinpoint that for state and federal reporting. So moving along to that next slide, this is just, that first bullet is basically just reiterating what I just said. We get that pretest level that serves as the anchor test for the year. Then after the 70 to 100 hours, we give the post-test that matches that pretest, and that's basically how we're moving forward with all this information. So I think I'll stop. Sorry if I was too gory on you, but that was just to explain how all that terminology works. That's another way to just make sure that it's all working for you. So we've got the basic results. So now that we understand what's used for placement and what's used for progress, on the progress side, we can look at that underlying content to identify students' instructional needs. We can look at those needs in terms of life skills with competency reports. We can look at that in terms of academic skills with content standard reports. I'll just say there are other resources that we also have that we'll look at, basically including a feature called CASAS Quick Search. More on that here in a minute. Okay, so moving along here, I think we're moving to the report. Okay, so before we get to the reports, one other resource, and I'll just point out, this is another one of those links in that curriculum management and instruction section of the CASAS website that I've said a few times already. But this is one of the most popular, if not the most popular, teacher-related resource on the CASAS website. Not sure if it's the most popular resource on the website, but I will say through lots of experience, peddling CASAS at different conferences, I can say this is definitely the most popular teacher-related resource at all the different conferences we do, at least for teachers. Whenever I do conferences that has a big teacher turnout, the skill level descriptors is always by far the most popular resource we hand out at our CASAS booth. The reason why is this. Again, we've got descriptors covering all different, sides of instructional life. We've got descriptors for ABE, descriptors for ESL, descriptors for disabilities. We've got them specifically for listening, specifically for math, et cetera, all kinds of different ways to look at them. The reason why I think they're so helpful is this, is they basically provide what you might call the translation all on one piece of paper, so to speak, where if you look at it, you can see it's got the scale score range to the left. It's got the CASAS ABCD level next to that. It's got the federal descriptors such as ABE intermediate low or ESL high beginning and so on. They are, also listed, as well as that narrative that gives you precisely what kind of student it is that we're talking about with each federal level and each CASAS level. So moving along to the reason why it's so popular with teachers is if you look at the left and look at CASAS level and CASAS scale score, some teachers know that well, other teachers maybe not so much. When you look at those federal levels like ESL beginning or ABE intermediate, some teachers know that well, others not so much. But you look at that specific narrative that spells out exactly what kind of student we're talking about when we're defining ESL intermediate low or ABE intermediate high or whatever. Every teacher knows exactly what we're talking about when we get to that narrative. So a lot of times teachers get confused with some of that federal terminology. Similarly, teachers get confused with our CASAS-related terminology. So the skill descriptors give you the quote-unquote correlation and translation of all that and relates it all to a simple narrative that every teacher can understand. Okay, so moving along here. Let's get into the reports. So again, I'll do this once more. We're transitioning out of basic explanation mode, and we're getting into more specific information about TE reports. Once again, I'll just make sure, are we all feeling pretty good to go right now, yes or no? And again, thank you for humoring me. Everybody's saying yes. Wonderful. Thank you for being so cooperative. You've been a wonderful group. Okay, so looking at some of these specific reports. The first one is called Next Assigned Test. The first one, in the interest of full disclosure, Next Assigned Test is not in the test results menu. I believe it's actually in the CASAS eTest menu, so you can find it under the Reports menu in TE, but the submenu would be CASAS eTest, not test results. But again, we've got the Next Assigned Test, or NAT. But this is basically the report that looks at the pre-testing that you've done with all students and gives you a very specific diagnosis on what test form to administer next as the post-test to make sure that that post-test matches the pre-test you've already given. It gives you that very specific diagnosis so you don't have to worry about whether you want to go equal or high or whatever. The report does all that for you. I'll just add that anybody who's doing eTests really doesn't need to worry about this report at all, because eTests will select that form for you automatically and do it all under the hood automatically for you, so you don't have to worry about post-test selection at all. But if you are still doing pencil paper, really good idea to run the Next Assigned Test, or NAT report, and that will basically give you a list of everybody who's pre-tested, and then in that right-hand column giving you a very cut and dry assignment as far as, which test to administer to each student next. Okay, so moving along. Next one to bring up is the class performance by competency. This is the one that we're probably going to be, this is the one that I wanted to discuss the most. I'm not sure if it's really the best that we have under the test results menu, but I'd say definitely safe to say that it's the most popular. We've got probably, 15 or 20 reports under that test results menu. Of those 15 or 20 available, probably safe to say the class performance by competency is the one that's used the most by the most agencies. So for starters, obviously this relates to competencies, not content standards. Equally obviously, this is a class level report. So again, you would go to the test results and then look at the competency performance submenu, and you can run it by student, by class, or by agency. So this is obviously by class. So the default way this report is organized is it will basically give you a separate report page for each CASAS form number. At each page in the report, it'll just list by item number. So you can see in this example, it's giving you the B-level Form 83, B-level reading Form 83R, and it's just basically listing each item from 1 to 28, listing each of those 28 items on the Form 83, and then for item 1 through 28, giving you the CASAS competency number, as well as that competency description for all 28 items. And then that middle column, once it lists out 1 through 28 and gives you the competency number, it's then looking at everybody in the class that's completed in this example Form 83 and calculating a percentage of the number of students that got that item correct. So for example, if you're that teacher, and you're in this class, there's no class number on here, but you're the teacher of this class, you'd review the report. If you looked at item number 9, for example, you might look at item number 9 on this slide and pat yourself on the back. On item number 9, that covers competency 147, interpret info about home maintenance. So in that area, you might pat yourself on the back because 84% of the class got that item right. That's a good indication that that's an area where your class is performing well. On the other hand, you might look at item number 3. That might be more an area of concern. Item number 3, only 38% got item number 3 right. That addresses identify information and job descriptions and job ads. So in this example, that might be an area of weakness. You can see we have 25 students that have done this form, so it's a pretty good number of students. Our percentage is very low, so this might suggest that that's an area that we want to embed more into our instruction. We might want to embed it into our lesson planning, get more curriculum materials that address job search type activities, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this is just an example. It's just, it's just using an example, from our sample database. So I don't know if it makes sense to you and your students, but again, just an example so you know how to read the report. So I'll just pause here. I think that explains the mechanics here. So I'll just check in again. Does everybody understand the mechanics of how you read the class performance by competency report? Any questions here? Please don't feel shy. Okay, mostly it looks like you're saying yes. I'm going to wait a minute. Lots of people still typing. Okay, where do you find it? So you would go to report, under the TE menu, it would be reports, test results, competency performance. So I just typed in the menu here. So reports, test results, competency performance. Then from there you can run it by student, by program, by class, whatever, but that will be the menu option. Okay, so it says too many. Okay, so Amy, you bring up a good point. So number one, if you're the teacher or you're the administrator and you're not generally the one that uses TE, to some extent, this TE detailed information may be helpful, but for a lot of you, I think Amy's probably giving the more realistic answer here, that if you're a teacher, what I would say is digest this information. It's important for you to know all this underlying content, know that this exists, and know how to use it. But the mechanical detail in TE, a lot of times, if you're the teacher, you may not necessarily need to know the mechanical details. At most agencies, you probably have somebody else that does TE. That's the person that needs to know all the mechanical detail. If you're the teacher, you can probably leave the mechanical detail for that. Okay, doing high to low, that's a good example of extreme mechanical detail. I'm not going to get into that here, but I'll just say, for those of you that do TE, yes, that is something you can do. You can do all sorts of detailed filters. You can do all sorts of detailed sorts. That's 30 or 45 minutes we don't have, but for those of you that know all that TE detail, there are lots of detailed sorts you can do. The other thing that I'm not going to get into in gory detail here, but just point out that it exists, and if you're the TE detailed person, you can see some screenshots here that should let you know what you need to do. Is when you run this report, you go to that setup window. Like any other report in TE, from the setup window, you run the report. In that setup window for the competency performance report, you have what's called student answer aggregation level. Say that 10 times fast. But you can see the screenshot here in the upper right where this report actually has 4 different ways of running it in TE. The common way of running it is the default way. It's the one that you can see on the screen called test item and competency. That's the default view for this report. If you just click generate, it will run it by test item and competency. That's the default view where it will just number it, in this case, item number 1 through 28 for the 28 items on the test form. But you have some alternative ways of doing it. By test and competency just ignores what item number it is. Competency category will give you the broader report that'll just show it by 2-digit number rather than by 3-digit number. And then task area runs you that information, but it will show by task area rather than by competency number. Okay, what I'll say is, I'm not quite sure what you mean. What kind of details are you looking for, Amy? That's sort of sounds like the 45 minutes we don't have, but is there a specific detail that I just didn't say over the last couple minutes that I might have missed? I'm sure I might have missed something, but just to be clear, what detail did I miss here? Okay, yeah, that might be better. We've got some more deep diving here tomorrow. Deep diving gets a little bit into this, but it's a little bit more into state and federal accountability. So I'll just say, send me an email if you want. There is a help document that gets it. I'll just say you can go to the TE help page. There's a section called instructional reports there. There's a really detailed TE help document that gives you the more mechanical step-by-step. If you're not sure what I'm talking about there, you can email me, and I'll gladly send you that link to the document that gives you the mechanical step-by-step, but that will give you the way to select it by class versus by student. It'll allow you to know where to find this aggregation level, radio buttons, etc. That'll give you all of the TE mechanical detail. Okay, the too many pages, if you're getting that prompt, again, I can't say exactly why you are specifically to find out your specific issue. That's more a call you want to make to tech support, but I'll just say broadly what that means is you just need to get into a little bit more detail. You need to select a specific class or a specific program or maybe a specific form number. Is a lot of you at medium to larger agencies, if you just click generate, you're including all the programs, all the classes, all the form numbers at your agency. Once you get into all the testing you've done, that can be a much larger report than you realize. So it's just way, 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 way too much information. So it's just forcing you to filter. Again, so you might want to try running it for ABE only, or for ESL only, or just specific one or two classes, or just select one or two form numbers. Again, just get into more specifics in the setup window. It's just saying you didn't filter for enough detail. If you just click generate, it's way too broad. The report's wanting you to get into a little bit more detail before it's willing to specify, because again, by not specifying, you've just got a real large report. There is like a cap on how many pages it will spit out. Okay, that's good. Yeah, Diana's bringing up, there's send something to TAP. If none of this is being answered, send something to TAP, and Diana and or Veronica will forward that to me, and I will definitely send something to them that they can post on the website with more detailed responses. I'll just say, related to Diana and Veronica's feedback, I will definitely send a link to that help document that provides all the mechanical details. I will basically tell Diana and Veronica, you can whack me upside the head as many times as you need to make sure I include that. It looks like if I don't include that, there's 125% I failed in providing you what you really need for posting, and etc. Veronica's following up. Thank you for that. Okay, I'll use Veronica and Diana's feedback to move along. So again, I'll send you that help document with the mechanical details, but following up a little bit on that item in the setup window called student answer aggregation level. It's a Freudian slip. I want to say aggravation every time I say this. But in any case, there's 4 ways of running the report. The most common way is the default way, called test item and competency, which just gives you that information by item number. If you do it by test and competency, it'll just give you the straight competency information without worrying about what test item number it was. So, for example, in this example, I'm showing you. I can't tell if it's that clear, but I guess there really isn't a good example here. Okay, so if you look at the very bottom of this, you see the 361. You can see that we've got a bigger number of items for that one than all the others. It's the one that addresses 361, identify parts of the body. That bottom selection has more items because it's an item that appeared on this test form twice. Instead of itemizing it out 2 separate times like the test item report, it's basically consolidating those 2 items that address the exact same competency and giving you one calculation for both items addressing the same competency, as opposed to giving you 2 separate line items with 2 separate calculations for the different test items. It's another one of those you say tomato, I say tomato issues, where you can run it by test item and it will give you 2 separate calculations where you're saying, hey, I don't care that it's the same content. It appears as 2 different items. The test item format is better versus, hey, it's the same darn competency. Let's get the more generalized information and get it all together so we can just see how everybody performed agency-wide or class-wide on this one specific competency. Okay, so moving along, here's competency category. If you want broader information, where it's basically just doing the 2-digit competency information instead of 3, so you're backing up a step and wanting more big picture information. If you want more big picture, good news is it allows you to draw from a much larger data set, so you can be pretty clear that you have a high number of students that tested. So the data that you're getting from the report is pretty rock solid because you've got a lot of students. But again, it's going to be very general. So if you want a larger sample size, this competency category is a really good idea. If you just want something super specific where you're sure that everything's an apples-to-apples comparison, this may not be such a good idea. But if you just want the more general 2-digit number, you can select this from the setup window and get it from that, get it on the report. The final way is by task area. So we describe task area toward the beginning, where again, competency looks at the underlying content related to basic everyday life skills. The task area refers to the format of the actual test item. It has nothing to do with content and just everything to do with the way the information is arranged on the screen or the piece of paper. So if you're looking more to arrange it by task area, you can select that here in this same setup window option. Okay, I don't see any more questions, so we'll move along here. So that's probably more than enough mechanical detail. I'll just say we did all the mechanical detail for the competency reports. I'll just say you can run in a different section of the TE test results menu. You can run those same reports by content standards instead of by competency. The same exact options you have available for CASAS competencies are also available for content standard. It's almost blow by blow the same options, but the key difference, of course, is if you run it for content standards, you're going to get it all arranged and aligned to CASAS content standards, predictably enough, rather than by CASAS competencies. So here's the screenshot of one of the ways you can organize the CASAS content standard reports. So getting into that, there's an aggregation level option for the content standard reports, just like there is for CASAS competencies. Only two options for content standards, but again, you can run it by test item or overall by just general test and content standard. The test item gives you the greater level of detail. The top screenshot you can see is what you get for test item. The bottom is the general overall test. I'll just point out that the test and content standard is the default view for content standard. At one point, we ran it by test item. That's that infamous dots format you can see on the screenshot. Gotta say, for most people, that dots format is way, way, way too detailed. So we have the default view by test. It's more the simple laundry list item. But again, another you say tomato, I say tomato issue, where again it organizes your student responses and gives you information on overall strengths and weaknesses by class, by individual student, or by overall agency, looking at those underlying academic skills, that is, the underlying content standards. Okay, I'll pause here for a minute. Any other questions? I see some of these mechanical questions. I think I explained the ones that came out. Veronica and Diana both kind of brought up a general response. I'll just run this again to make sure I've done it by content standard and by competency. Is everybody still with me, yes or no? I've been babbling. So good chance just to make sure I'm not over babbling and everybody's still with me. I've been doing lots of babbling, I admit. Okay, everybody's saying you're okay. So again, we've got competency reports that we can run in several different ways. We've got content standard reports, not quite as many different ways as competencies, but still multiple selections. So we'll move to the next slide. So we've talked about the reports. Another key ingredient are those practice test items. So if you go back a handful of slides, we showed you that screenshot that was the page of our website called Curriculum Management and Instruction. There were a couple links there related to competencies, a couple others related to content standards, yet another one that was called Practice Test Items that give you sample test items. We've got samples for reading, samples for listening, samples for math at all different levels. You name the CASAS level and modality, we have that sample item available for practice test items. So the age-old issue here is you know that you've got lots of testing to do with your students, whether you like it or not. You know that your students are going to have a certain anxiety level related to testing, whether we like it or not, whether you like it or not, or whether your students like it or not. But at the same time, we know that you can never use CASAS tests to practice whether you or your students like it or not. So making sure all of those dots are connected appropriately, we have sample test items. So you're never cheating and using the actual test items, but that you have a way to practice with your students and thereby have a foolproof way to directly get at those students' anxieties. Again, you download the practice test items. It's a great classroom activity to make sure your students, relieve their test anxiety, to make sure your students understand exactly what they're getting into with the CASAS testing. Again, download those sample test items, bring it up as a training tool during any scheduled class. Again, use the practice test items and never the actual items on the CASAS test. Okay, moving along, another key thing is finding instructional materials. So at the end of the day, we've organized these items by life skills competencies. We've organized these items by academic-related context standards. We've organized these items by test format-related task areas. So you can choose one or all of those different ways to follow up, at the student, agency, and class levels to, again, use your assessment results to inform instruction. Once you've run those reports and organized that, vast amount of information available there based on all those different levels, the next step is you may want to look at what instructional materials would be appropriate to follow up and use in the class. So for this, the Achilles heel is what you've probably heard us say forever is we at CASAS is an assessment publisher, but it's not necessarily a curriculum publisher. We're a small mom-and-pop agency. We're not a big guy like Oxford Press or Cambridge Press or McGraw-Hill or whatever. We're a small fry. All we do at CASAS is we make tests. We don't do curriculum materials. So we don't have a big laundry list of textbooks for you to order like some of those big guys do. So we have what we think is the next best thing. We have a product called CASAS Quick Search Online that allows you to follow up with the information you've obtained using the competency reports and or use the content standard report so you can follow up and get the specific instructional materials appropriate. So again, we have Quick Search. Again, it's in that same curriculum management and instruction section of our website. It's a free online tool with more than 2,000 instructional materials. So there's lots of ways you can organize Quick Search. So again here, backing up, by title, by publisher, by CASAS test form, etc. The most common way to do it is to align by CASAS competency or CASAS content standard. That's what we're showing you here in this example. That here in this example, what we're hypothetically saying is we've run the competency reports. We've identified a specific CASAS competency that we know is an area of weakness in our class. Long story short is we're just saying that we've done the research and the weakness is competency 412, using job applications and resumes. So we're just saying, hypothetically, we've done all our homework and we know 412 is an area of weakness, so we're following up here. So we're clicking that area in Quick Search called competencies. We're searching for the competency. In this case, we're specifying competency 4.1.2. We're clicking go. By doing that, you can see it gives us a big long laundry list. Here's a big long list of a bunch of different instructional materials that we have verified are A, pertaining to 412, and B, things that we know are appropriate materials. We don't have anything detailed, but what I will say, there is a lady who works part-time at CASAS that does research all of these materials before we post them on Quick Search. She doesn't go over them with a fine-tooth comb, but she does go through and looks at everything and basically gives it a seal of approval before we're ever foolishly putting it in our Quick Search product. So the fact that it's listed in Quick Search may or may not mean that you like it, but it does at least mean it's a legitimate instructional material from a legitimate publisher that at least belongs in the software. You may need to decide for yourself whether you like it or not, but it was at least looked up and we know it's a genuine material and not just some spam that somebody's cooked up to pollute your email inbox. Okay, so that's Quick Search. Is everybody familiar with the basics of how to find Quick Search on the website and what sort of information you can get from Quick Search? Let's just have a quick sanity check, yes or no. Okay, everybody's saying yes. Okay, nobody's begging to differ. Okay, great. Thank you for being so darn cooperative. I'm assuming you'd call me on it if I was being not so clear. So that's really about it. I can't remember if I'm a little over or a little under. I think we had till 1:30 technically. Nobody's ever complained if I took too little, a little under, okay. So I'll just say nobody ever complains. That's all I had. I think I trimmed down some stuff from last time because last time I took too long. So nobody complains if I'm too quick. But I'll just say, is there anything that I might have given short shrift to that you really need me to expound on? I wasn't really expecting to take too little. I'm usually taking way too long, never too little on this sort of stuff. So I'll pause here for questions. While I'm pausing for questions, I'll just say tomorrow we're using a similar approach, but we're looking at different material. So here we're looking at instructional resources. We're kind of breaking it down. We've done the research. So here's where we've done the research. Here's how we can follow up and look at do's and don'ts and follow up on more specifics so we can follow up on the instructional side. You might say tomorrow uses the same logic or methodology, but we're following up on things to look for in terms of how we might follow up on our basic conclusions related to state and federal reporting rather than instruction. Though I'll say it's also bringing up ways to follow up on this, where this is all kind of telling you how to follow up and identify the appropriate TE report, and then furthermore how to set up the report to get at the specific info you need. What we're bringing up tomorrow is kind of the more loosey-goosey content, where you don't need to know anything about the TE report, but it's kind of more a heads up. Here's just some general instructions at the agency level and the classroom level of just agency habits and student habits that we would say you might want to address. So if you're looking for that kind of information, we'll get way more into that tomorrow, and we'll relate it all a little bit more directly at state and federal reporting. We'll basically tantalize you a little bit with some of the more specific data points that we've been bringing up for the last year or longer at CASAS. There's also some that I know Neil has been bringing up in his presentations more recently. So to some extent, the presentation tomorrow really attempts to bridge that gap. There's those points that yahoos like me have been bringing up for a year or longer. There's some other points that Neil's been bringing up more recently. So we're going to bridge that gap. And number two, we're going to look at, the presentation we'll do next week. So I'll just step backwards here a little bit because we have more time. We've got assessment to instruction that we just completed right now. Tomorrow we're going to look at that using data performance, using data to improve agency performance. So the same methodology, but looking at it in terms of state and federal reporting rather than instruction. And then the one we do next Wednesday on the 27th will be a more specific data points where we'll start to do a little bit more of a deeper data dive. We can only go so deep when we're doing it via webinar and via PowerPoint, but we'll try to whet your appetite for some lab-based trainings we're hoping to do over the next few months or so. And then with those deeper data dives in person, we'll get more specifically at ways that you can follow up on the AP reports and other things you can use to get into more information. All right, so I think Veronica followed up on what she needed to follow up on. I guess I'll just say Veronica's saying tomorrow at 12 p.m. I hope to see a lot of you there. I guess I'll just say any of you with any last-minute questions, or Veronica, Diana, any last-minute input before we hang up and sign off.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. I have posted links, a registration link for tomorrow's webinar as well as next week's webinar. So if you haven't registered for either of those, please be sure to do so. I've also posted the URL of where the webinar recording as well as the resources will be found. They will be posted later on this afternoon, so please be sure to check those out. And if there are any colleagues that you have who were unable to attend today's webinar, please be sure to share this information with them so that they'll have access to it as well. Like Diana stated, if you have any questions or need further support in this area or any other area related to student data reporting, please be sure to contact TAP at tap@aabg.org, or you can submit a support request on our website, and we'll be happy to find the information for you or get you in touch with someone at CASAS IEJ. Thank you all very much. I'm going to close the webinar, and when I do, the evaluation will appear. Please be sure to fill out the evaluation and let Jay know what you thought about today's webinar. And then also, if there are additional technical assistance areas or professional development areas that you would like TAP to address, please be sure to use that platform to let us know what you are in need of, and we'll help to fulfill those needs. Again, thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow afternoon. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.